It's like we're coming to court. You afraid of the audience, Brian?
I don't want to have a dramatic entry.
Oh, all right. Actually, he doesn't want to be seen on the same stage with me. He's already found out I'm a little too smart alecky.
Which he is, by the way.
5 minutes. See what you learned? Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. Would ask our good friends here in-house if you'll be so kind to check that cell phones have been muted as we prepare to begin. A wonderful courtesy for our speakers. And of course, our internet viewers are welcome at any time to send their questions or comments, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. And one bit of commercial, you will notice that if you are not on Brian's mailing list for his emails, we have cards for you out in front that you can sign up and join for the Kilmeade Connection. If you haven't gotten on that yet, please add your names to that list and we'll be glad to forward them on to him. Hosting our discussion today is Genevieve Wood, Senior Fellow in Communications here at Heritage. She also serves as Senior Contributor to the Daily Signal, Heritage's multimedia news organization. Please join me in welcoming Genevieve. Genevieve?
Thank you, John, very much. Welcome, everybody, to Heritage. On behalf of Jim DeMint, our president, my 250-some-odd colleagues here in this building and around the country, we were glad and delighted to have you all here with us today for this event. Brian Kilmeade is no stranger, I'm sure, to many of you. He's a co-host of Fox and Friends. It is the #1 news program in the mornings on cable television. Great credit to him and to his two co-hosts, Steve Doocy and Elizabeth Hasselback. Brian is known for being able to interview just about any type of person, politicians, entertainers, sports celebrities. Some of his past victims, or interviewees, I should say, are folks such as President George W. Bush, Michael Jordan, and, of course, American Idol Simon Cowell as well. But apparently being on television 3 hours a day is not enough for Brian Kilmeade, because when that show is over, Brian enters the radio studio where he hosts a show, Kilmeade and Friends, for another 3 hours each day, Monday through Friday. It's a program that's on over 140 stations across the country. So Brian is very prolific when it comes to talking, but he's also prolific when it comes to writing. He is now the author of 4 books. 2 of his first 3 books ended up on the New York Times bestseller list. One of those was George Washington's Secret Six. And seeing the success of that book, he and his co-author, Don Yaeger, teamed up again to bring us a story of another interesting but not so well-known story from American history. And that's the book he's going to talk to us about today, which is Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates, which is the forgotten war that changed American history. As I think you'll learn from Brian's remarks, there is a lot we can learn from history, a lot of things that today's leaders, such as President Obama, might be able to learn from history and from people like Thomas Jefferson. And we welcome Brian now to share us on that story. Brian Kilmeade.
Genevieve Wood, thank you very much. You obviously could give the speech yourself, and we got you galleys. You are now eligible for a true hardback copy for at very least a discount, if not the full price. And then John Hillbot, thank you very much. It took me 9 seconds to realize how funny and sarcastic John can be when I walked in here today. But I'm privileged to be here in front of you. It's also good luck, because the first event I had for George Washington's Secret Six was also at Heritage, and that ended up being a bestseller for the 19 weeks and then the paperback for 8 weeks. So it was an unbelievable run that shocked everybody. And it's not because I'm cute, because I am. It's because I think fundamentally America is a very patriotic place. We don't walk around. I mean, there's some people wearing the uniform. Obviously, they're patriotic. They decide to sign up for it. There's no draft anymore. Obviously, if you're running for office, you're patriotic. You believe in the country. But for the average truck driver, for the teacher, for the landscaper, to be picking up this book, George Washington's Secret Six, and talking to me about the spies. And the reason why it resonated, in my humble opinion, is because we know how great George Washington is. We know about Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and all our founding fathers. We read great biographies, and we still don't know everything about them. What they did is extraordinary. But what most of you know, and I think we're beginning to realize, is we have no country without the so-called everyday Americans doing extraordinary things to keep the country going, the spirit alive, fighting the wars, getting the economy going from the ground up. So when I was able to talk about a bartender, I can relate to that. A longshoreman, oh yeah, that makes sense. If I could tell you about a guy that was a newspaper guy, if I could tell you about a farmer, I can relate to that. And next thing you know, they did extraordinary things with the leadership of George Washington. So that book has some success. I had that idea in 1989 as they exposed this to me, being a Long Island resident. I was able to see, feel, and touch this story and thought, why couldn't, with all my ridiculous field trips to go see an organ at Radio City or a big garden in the east of Long Island or a winery, which is great for kids to see in grammar school, why couldn't they have ever brought me around to the Spy Trail? So I thought we could bring that and make a movie. And then later, Don Yaeger says to me, and we both have a sports background, let's do a book. And I go, I want to do this as a movie. I got to give the context and bring this forward. He says, no. He goes, let's do a book. I go, well, if we approach you like an investigative project and we bring something new to the story, I'll do it. And we did it, and it worked, so thank goodness for that. And then I got exposed to the Barbary Wars. And I knew a little bit about it in social studies, a little bit in history, found a little bit about it in college. And then after 9/11, when you heard about the Islamic threat and Islamic extremists, and we tried to make heads or tails of it, I'd see great columnists look back and try to retrieve this information. And I thought, wait a second, what are you talking about? Islamic extremists, I thought they were pirates. Oh yeah, they had pirate activity, but they were motivated and pushed and used it as an excuse, the Quran and Islam, to attack us. And we had no axe to grind. After all, our book picks up in 1784 and 1785. We're an economy who just got rid of the British rule, but we also lost British protection. And we're out in the open seas, buried in war debt. We do what the Americans always do. We try to work our way out of it. We got to get our economy going. And we're going to get it going, we're going to get it roaring, because we got this thing called ingenuity, hard work, and tremendous natural resources. So to do that, we're going to have to use the Mediterranean. And we're going to have to use the southern half of the Mediterranean to be able to get the southern half of Europe. So as we go through those waterways, we have a little bit of a problem. There are these pirates who see us as a soft touch, as an easy mark, and they began to take our ships. From the Dolphin to the Maria to the Betsy, they take our guys, and they take them, not only imprison them, they make them slaves. They not only take our ships, they take the cargo. They plunder them. And then when we try to stop it and try to make heads or tails of it, their explanation is, you're infidels, we have the right to do that, unless, of course, you want to pay us a certain amount of money. Really? Is that in the Quran? Yeah, it's in the Quran. So we don't know much about it, so we decide to send our A-team out there. In London, we have this guy named John Adams, future President of the United States. In France, we have this other gentleman named Thomas Jefferson. So we decide that the best way to approach this is to begin talking to them and try to find out what their rationale is for taking our stuff, taking our guys hostage, and imprisoning them. Because we are not Spain, we're not France, your problem's with them. We're brand new. So they go into London, and they set up a meeting with the ambassador to Tripoli, now Libya, and they do. Thomas Jefferson decides he's going to join John Adams on his request. So they go in and meet the ambassador, and they have a great conversation. The guy seems amiable, he seems approachable, he seems like somebody we can deal with. Until, of course, it came down to decision time, at which time he talked about the rationale for capturing our guys and taking our stuff, and citing the Quran. Now, Jefferson read the Quran. He says, it's not in there for you to do this. We don't have a problem with you. Having said that, they said there's only one way out. You got to pay the money. We don't have any money. So we leave. We find out what Spain was paying. We find out what France was paying. We find out what Sweden was paying. And we're actually getting charged more than that. And we don't have the revenue. And both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson leave with the same sentiment. They're horrified and they're angered. But they have different marching orders from here on in. John Adams, to paraphrase, essentially said, look, we can't fight these guys unless we want to fight them forever. Man, is that right? And America doesn't have the stomach for a long war. Man, is that still true? Thomas Jefferson comes out and says, listen, I'm looking in their eye. I'm understanding the message I get from this meeting is the price is only going to go up, and sooner or later the attacks are going to begin again. I say we fight them. We don't have a government. We don't have a constitution. We don't have a president. But the recommendation back is essentially we're going to go with Adams. And we're going to find a way to borrow the money and make the payments. So the trade begins again. But like Marco Rubio, our payments are a little bit late. Only kidding. We're taped. Oh, I'm in trouble now. Only kidding, Senator. Our payments are a little bit late, and they're not right, and they want Jules and company with this, and we're not able to keep up. And, man, Jefferson was 100% correct. We're not going to be able to do this. They're going to be implacable. And I'm talking about Morocco. I'm talking about Tripoli. I'm talking about Algeria. I'm talking about Tunis. I'm talking about Tunisia. We got 4 separate countries to cut deals with, all with the same mentality, all with competition with each other, all who have their economy depending on feasting on people who are productive economies. So sooner or later, George Washington takes power. And he asked the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, to write up a report, and he does. He doesn't say, my recommendation is, Mr. President, for you to attack. But essentially, if you read these reports, and we did, they essentially say, we got to stand up for ourselves. It's the wrong message to say to the rest of the world. And they use phrases in this report like, aren't we Americans? Since when are we victims? So Washington looks around and says, my only thing missing is a Navy. So I think I have an idea. Let's essentially, my words, split the baby. I'm going to make the payments, which, get this, are 20% of our economy at the time. But I'm also going to commission the building of a Navy. And we'll see where it goes. Because America early on was against a standing Army, was against a standing Navy, because they were afraid for various reasons for what they came from, that the Army and Navy and the military would become too strong and overwhelm the people. This is a general saying, so they understand what he's doing. So we commissioned, we sped out the contracts, we built 6 ships. By the time Washington's done, by the time Adams takes power, we're ready. And we decided to use some of these naval ships to stick up for what we believe in against the French in what they call a quasi-war. But when Adams is confronted with the opportunity to stand up to the Barbary powers, those 4 I mentioned, those Islamic extremists, he goes, no. Now, as you know, everybody in this room especially, within 4 years he loses power to Jefferson, his vice president, he takes over. They don't speak anymore. Actually, Adams tries to dismantle what he had of his 30 ships in his Navy. And when Jefferson takes over, he knows exactly what he's doing. He didn't campaign on it, didn't talk about it, but he knew, if I stop the payments, they're going to declare war. He stops the payments, and sure enough, the first foreign power to declare war on America, ironically, is Tripoli, now known as Libya. And they do it by trying to chop down our flagpole, which is an interesting way to call you out today. And they did it, and they struggled with it. And we write about in the book that they couldn't get the flagpole down. It was supposed to be this dramatic ceremony. The thing wouldn't fall, so finally the game ended. The night fell, and they pulled it down. We don't even know it, but Jefferson knows this. I'm going to send those ships out to start providing some security in that area. But talk about a modern issue. His one issue is we don't have congressional approval yet. How does he know? He basically helped form the country, so he doesn't have to look in the books. I'm pretty sure I didn't give myself approval for the president to have a single power. It helps when you write the rules. So he sends over and goes, I have an idea. They'll see the size of our ships. They'll see how sturdy they're built. They'll see how formidable we are. We're going to show some power, not necessarily use the power. We're going to blockade. We're going to smother the Tripoli economy. Then we find out later they declare war on us. That's the problem with communications then. It was before Instagram, but not before Snapchat. And they couldn't really know that they declared war on us. We just know we're going to blockade anyway. So we're trying to set up a blockade. And we set up a blockade, but we're terrible at it. The communications between our ships are bad. Then it's freezing. The weather's bad. And guess what? These corsairs, these pirates, they're coy, they're cunning, and they know the area. They know the water. They're getting in and out. So Jefferson's blockade and show of power to finally get them to the table to understand we're not going to pay anymore falls apart. And guess what also happens? This city knows it very well. Pressure from Washington to declare a war or not and to go ahead and rationalize what we're doing over there. Because we're still terrorized, because we, just like, and this was celebrated and marked, it's celebrated in Iran, but just as we were upset with the 444 days it took us to get our 52 hostages back from Iran, we felt the same way, the same empathy that we felt there every day that the Betsy, the Dolphin, and the Maria crew was being held against their will and enslaved. As a people, as I look back in the National Intelligencer, which is the name of the paper at the time, we suffered. So the blockade doesn't work. We finally get congressional approval. You know what the problem with the blockade was? And Captain Dale would tell us this. Rules of engagement. Oh, the rules of engagement were bad. We could not engage the enemy unless they engaged us, unless we felt threatened. Man, does that sound familiar. Talk to a few Navy SEALs who are walking around these streets or touring the Smithsonian, they'll tell you the same story. So the rules of engagement gradually changed. Why? Because they were not working. Why? Because it was costing us a lot of money. Got to get the right guy in there. They had Captain Morris in there for a while. This guy was traveling with his wife. He thought he'd go through Gibraltar and go through Spain and be wined and dined. Well, our ship sat there, and while the Tripoli Pirates made fun of us. Because every day, just like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that you don't wipe them out is a victory. When Saddam Hussein stayed in power, even though you would think he was humiliated, it's a victory. I survived America. Every day that the JV team ISIS stays in power, even though they're diminished and they're pressured, is a victory against America. It's the same mentality back then. Little by little, we do what America always does. We get it right. We get the permission to serve some more, and then we start pushing. We finally get the right guy in charge. His name is Edward Preble, and Preble's men, and they call Preble's boys, start pounding, led by Stephen Decatur. They start grabbing those ships. They start pressuring them. And instead of taking them hostage, we would just take out their mast, take out their sail, and just push them out to sea. You find a way to get back. The message was sent. We're starting to send some power. So we'd go inside, and we'd talk to the Basha of Tripoli. Say, you ready now? No. Why? Because they don't care about their people. They just care about their power. If they cared about their people, they would care that they're being shelled on a daily basis and their life is a mess and they can't even go shopping or walk in the market because they don't know if they're going to get hit by an American cannon. They don't care. Then finally, Jefferson makes the ultimate decision, I think. That idea that was kind of far-fetched 3 years before this conflict started suddenly seems to make sense. This guy, William Eaton, who's one of the Renaissance men of his generation, if I can encourage anyone watching at home, if I can encourage anyone in this room to do one thing, it's Google William Eaton. And my goal with this story is not to sell you on Jefferson, you're already sold. My goal with the story is the same one that I had with the Washington story, that Jefferson gets you to buy the book and gets you interested in the story, but you leave thinking about William Eaton, Edward Preble, these are just two, as well as Stephen Decatur. And then you realize how many great Americans lived and died in their generation. They were lauded, and after that, outside of naval and military circles and the War College that you go and visit once in a while and take a seminar in, they are forgotten. My goal is for somebody to say, you got to read, son, daughter, you got to read, which, by the way, is how I refer to my children. You got to read about these guys. So William Eaton had this idea. He was a counselor. Now we call him an ambassador over in Tunisia. William Eaton's a pretty extraordinary guy. He's 15 years old. He said, you know what, Dad? I think I want to join the Army. Dad says, no, you're not. He goes, I'm going anyway. He gets sick, goes home, feels better, goes back and fights again, becomes an officer. Then would later train under Mad Anthony, but in between that, would get himself into Dartmouth and go to school. He learned multiple languages, seems to be somewhat of a genius, as well as an incredible war fighter and very smart in battle. He would learn Indian dialects as well as Arabic dialects, and would be very impressed, even the crazy, in a good way, Mad Anthony, the general. So he learned military tactics. He really impressed Senator Pickering. Senator Pickering says, I need somebody to go over who's a tough person and go over and be our ambassador over to Tunisia. He says, I'll do it. Never been out of America. I'll try it. So he goes over there, and he observes the culture. And as much as he likes the people, he can't believe they would subject themselves to these terrible rulers. Everything America fought for, the freedom, these people don't even have. And he would encourage Jefferson and everybody else, fight these guys. They're nothing. We got to take them on. We act like they're 10 feet tall. We should fight them. So all of a sudden, James Cathcart goes up to him and says, hey, William, got an idea. There's a deposed ruler of Tripoli. It's the brother. This crazy little brother killed the older one and forced out the middle one. And they kept his family hostage to make sure he's away. He wants to come back. Why don't you ask Jefferson if you can go get him out of Egypt and come back and put him in power? And the only thing we want is to be friends with us and establish relations. We don't want to dominate. We don't want to be imperialistic. We just want to have peace with this country. So in the beginning, Jefferson and Gallatin, the Treasury Secretary, said, you're crazy. After 3 years of almost a standoff, we're winning, but it doesn't matter because the guy's still in power. Jefferson goes, you know that idea you had? I think we're going to do it. But I don't want any fingerprints on it. It's going to be our first covert activity. So he says, go over to Gallatin, get yourself 1,000 muskets, $20,000. We'll give you a few Marines and make it happen. At the very least, he didn't think it would work, but he thought he'd pressure him from the ground. We were going to start our first land war against a Muslim power who are Islamic extremists. So against impossible odds, the Argus drops him off in Egypt. They go and hunt this guy down, Hamid. Again, they only had Snapchat. So he had to go in through the city, find him in Alexandria, introduce himself, convince him to go along, marshal his men, hire some mercenaries, only had a handful of Marines with him, led by Presley O'Bannon. who would do anything for William Eaton because he had incredible leadership ability. They'd start in Alexandria, Virginia, in the perfect world, grab some horses, grab some supplies, pay off and buy some military, some mercenaries, and they were going to march. The problem, no maps, no real direction, no roads, but they did have GPS. Only kidding. They start in Egypt without absolutely any maps. Hammett says, I'm going to give it a shot. He doesn't really have the valor and the strength and the spine of his brother. And you have William Eaton almost training him to be a leader through this journey. You have all the uprisings along this 500-mile trek that took about 5.5 weeks and got you into Derna, just outside this place called Benghazi, and very close to a place called Tripoli. So he marches over 500 miles, probably longer because it wasn't direct, because they were literally trying to find their way through, talking to Bedouins and doing whatever directions they can have using the stars. And they find themselves outside Derna, which had walls to protect, and they were outnumbered 2-1. So what does William Eaton do? What all Marines, even though he was Army, but he was leading Marines, do. When outnumbered, you charge. They take this city with a standing army in 2.5 hours. Among the people astounded when this was reported is a guy named Thomas Jefferson. Oh my goodness, did he just take a major city? We just wanted him to scare him. They take the city in 2.5 hours, so people come up and say, you're in charge. And Eaton goes, I'm not in charge. This is your city. We're not looking to oppress. It reminds me very much when after shock and awe in Iraq. If you talk to any of the Army or the Marines who were first into Baghdad, the first thing they said is, what do I do? And the first thing we said, whatever you want. They didn't understand they had a degree of freedom. So in charge, we put up the American flag in Derna, and we started taking control. Eaton, with his brilliant leadership skills, starts making sure everybody gets fed. They start handling all the daily duties because the governor fled. And then all of a sudden, they did the inevitable. They prepared for a counterattack, and they blew him away again. By the time it was done, Hammett had learned to fight. His bunch of mercenaries were motivated. They said, I love this. The people of Derna were happy. But when this started happening, the word got back to the Basha. He's in charge. He says, you know, they took Derna. They're coming for Benghazi, and they're coming for you. How do we know the reaction? Because the prisoners saw them. The American prisoners, 303, many of which made up of the Philadelphia that was grounded itself and was taken. Those 303 saw how nervous he was. He thought it was over. He would have cut any deal possible. Enter Tobias Lear. He's on Edward Preble's boat, and he was in charge of the negotiation. He's a relatively shady character who was the chief assistant to George Washington. And for some reason, Thomas Jefferson always had him in the eye of the storm, too. And there's a belief, not to get sidetracked too much, that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had a spat in writing. And Jefferson knew that Washington was also a historic figure and didn't want historians to know how bad this got and how angry Washington got at him. So who would be in control of Washington's letters and his death? Who was the last one to see him? Tobias Lear. And if those letters were to disappear, who would be responsible? And then who would owe who a favor? Tobias Lear. So he's going to go in and he's going to negotiate the first American victory in war. And without telling Eaton, who had plans to take Tripoli and give these people the liberation they deserve and take out the leaders who he observed, without any notice, he cuts a deal. Actually even cuts a payment. We didn't even free Hammett's family. We cut a premature deal. Next thing you know, our guys are out, everyone's celebrating, word gets to Eaton, you got a day to hop on the ship, you're done. He's got to go and explain to Hammett, the deal we cut, we're not living up to the hype. We got to go. Wheaton comes back, he's hailed as a hero. He's given used sections of Maine as a reward. But he becomes an alcoholic because he could not rationalize the fact that his ultimate destiny, what he thought he trained his whole life for, would not be fulfilled. And that's taking over this area, providing liberation, and America the ultimate victory and respect. So he would die in the year 1809. In 1815, his bio would be released because he had all these letters and he had some people who knew he lived a historic life, even though it was an ugly end. I bought his biography, which there was only a handful made, on Amazon for $112 from 1815. I've been trying to get it, and I got it. That should be worth, and I'm not just looking to send my son to college, which he'd like to go, but that should be worth, when you look at his biography, when you look at his background, that should be worth $1 million. You should be knowing him as well as you know MacArthur and Patton, because those are the types of people that made up America. Now, when you look at impact, you look at Stephen Decatur. Stephen Decatur what happens is one major setback under Edward Preble was the grounding of the USS Philadelphia. In an effort to hunt down one of those small little ships, the USS Philadelphia went into very shallow water, surprising shallow water, but they didn't have depth finders back then. And it's amazing they caught any fish, because people are basically cheating now. If you look at the fishermen, they basically have the fish jumping in the boat today. I don't even know what the challenge is, but I digress. I live near water. But they run aground, the ship's stuck, they end up being taken 303 prisoners, and they want to make that the flagship of the new Tripolitan Navy. The problem was Stephen Decatur was on board, and he's commissioned by Edward Preble with about 70 guys to go take that ship and blow it up. If we're not going to have it, you're not going to use it. And so impressive was Stephen Decatur's Navy SEAL-like mission. I thought I'd read you this. Essentially, Lord Nelson says, the American commander with a small force in a very short time has done more for the cause of Christianity. This is actually Pope Pius. But Admiral Horatio Nelson called it the most bold and daring act of this age. That's how impressive Stephen Decatur is. Now keep in mind, our country's 15 years old. These countries are hundreds of years old. No one thought we'd be successful, let alone become a naval power quickly, let alone have the integrity and values to stand up for what we wanted to do. After all, everybody else was writing checks. Oh man, those guys are crazy. Here, just leave us alone. Those guys are crazy. America? Really? You're going to stand up to us? Yeah. You know what else we learned? How to build a ship. I was on the USS Constitution the other day doing some stand-ups to do some wraparounds because Fox and Friends did allowed me to do a nice little feature about the book. It was made, our boats were made out of a special oak, and with that oak was layered in a special sandwich that allowed the USS Constitution to get the nickname Old Ironsides. There was no iron. There was copper on the bottom. There was no iron. But that's how thick these trees were, located only in America, built correctly. We went to school on the British. We went to school on the French. We saw what worked, what didn't work, and we made it better. And then 1812, which is a whole other conversation, which I don't know if there's enough tape in that camera for, then we could talk about how great we were in naval warfare. When it was all said and done, we went to war in 1812, and then guess what happened? While we were fighting the British was, with their instigation, started attacking our guys again, started capturing our guys again, started taking our ships again. After Madison fought to a tie, which could have been a victory against the British after a terrible start, he said, Decatur, do me a favor. William Bainbridge, if you don't mind, let's send the Navy, while we're still dressed, over to the Barbary powers, and let's send a message. We essentially showed up with our Navy, got our guys back, and not only did we get our guys back, we made them pay for our inconvenience. Cut peace with all of them. They were silent really into the 1970s, 1980s after that. And America sent a message. And this is what I prematurely read before, which I'll edit it out for C-SPAN, if you don't mind. They said, the American commanders with a small force in a short space of time has done more for the cause of Christianity, because they looked at this as a religious war, than the most powerful nations of Christendom have done for ages. So I leave you with a few thoughts. We keep on debating whether America's exceptional or not. Are we just voting for our home team? Do we just think we're special because we're here and everyone wants to think they're special? Everyone wants the Mets to win the World Series and the Royals to be special because they're like reminding of us. And if they have any faux pas and if they have any problems, doesn't matter. My guys are the best. But when I research George Washington's Secret Six and see the steel in which I saw this network set up, these so-called everyday Americans asked to do extraordinary things for the cause of a country which hasn't been formed yet. When I see this country that's 10 years old fight the way they fought against impossible odds when everyone said it's folly to take on these ruthless terrorist pirates, and I see what they're doing, and I see the way the rest of the world was responding to us then, and I see the way the rest of the world responds to us now. I mean, after all, people aren't sneaking out. They're sneaking in, and there's a reason. We were born in the best place, at the best time, with the best country that has turned out the most formidable military in the history of the world, with the strongest economy, that corrects its mistakes when they do it. And when we do make mistakes, at least we can say they were hustle mistakes. We intended to do the correct thing. Sometimes the execution was a little off. So how many nations can say that? Absolutely none. In fact, in my humble opinion, we're seeing what happens when America pulls back. It's chaos, and the bad guys step forward, and we realize that. Another thing I'd like to say, too, is in looking and researching this, which is absolutely fantastic and so much fun, you find out that they were worried in 1800 that we were losing the spirit of '76. In 1800, they were worried. We always hear about that every election cycle. We forgot how special it is to be in America and to be an American. They were worried then. And as long as we're worried about it, we're never going to lose it. So my hope is, and the reason why I think this has jumped out to quick sales, and it's done exceedingly well, and maybe it's going to be as successful as George Washington's Secret Six, I think it's because America wants to learn about Americans, and one of the biggest mistakes in our current school system is they're not allowing people to focus on social studies. And for those who say, well, I'm better at math and science than I am in social studies, do you like stories? What if I told you the stories are true? What kid doesn't like a story? What if I let you see and feel these stories? In Washington, you're privileged. You got the Ford Theater here, it's Smithsonian there, you got the Capitol building here. You know, you go down the coast and you got Yorktown and Jamestown. They're privileged. All I have to do is go on a field trip around the block. With me on Long Island, so many battles are there, I'm lucky. But if you could tell these stories and these kids get interested, you let them reenact it and feel it, then I think they're going to care. And my most heartening thing I get, and the thing that makes me feel the best, is when I get from a parent who said, this is the first, I gave it to my son or daughter, and it's the first book I didn't push them to read, they read it on their own. And when I get these teenagers who write me letters, it's really heartening. I feel like we did our job. So if we sold 2 or 2 million, I prefer the 2 million, but even if we sold 2, if we tell the stories of everyday Americans, it's not just about Jefferson, Hamilton, and Washington, I think I did my job. And that's why I couldn't wait to come here and talk about this. I couldn't wait to spread the word about this. And I'm so glad that C-SPAN's here with their cameras, because at Fox News we have a wide, loyal audience, but I'd love to expand it too. So I'll be having book signings around the country, opportunity to talk with you, interact with you, and continue to develop the story. But that is the story of Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates. What I also would like to do is give you an opportunity, as I welcome Genevieve back up here, to ask a few questions, about 3 or 4 questions. If you have personal questions, I blush, so I might back off. That's okay. If you have questions about the story, I also know this. I don't know everything. I know I blitzed this. I know Don and I love doing it. I love the fact that everyone was open. We have a guy named Jim Sofka who kept the flag going for the Barbary Pirates back in the 90s. No one cared. And the 80s prior to that, since 9/11, a lot of people care. And instead of him saying, Brian or Dr. Larry Sabato saying, well, it's really our story. I'm a Jefferson expert and I'm a Barbary Wars expert. They said, how can I help you? So they would say, look, I wrote this column. I wrote this story. This was in a teacher's manual. Oh, you want to go to the Jefferson Library? This is where you go. No one ever goes here. And if people weren't so open, honest, and the same thing with Washington, where people are in these spy museums making $10,000 a year or doing reenactments, who actually also are historians, if they weren't so open and honest, I would not have been able to pull off this book. And it probably will not, whatever success it has, it wouldn't have happened if people weren't saying, I'm on your team. If you tell this story, I'm on your team. And you do it right and be it fair, I'm on your team. As soon as we set up the outline, we found out we had a lot of people on our team. So I would like to be able to answer every question, but I can honestly say, I look in the audience, I recognize some of you too. I know how smart you are. I know some of you just sit there and you study this, and I don't want to come off as an expert. Just look at me as a very enthusiastic American who wants to tell a story that I think America has to know. So would you like to start? Genevieve, you want to come up?
First of all, Brian, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I've actually, I got an early copy of this book, and I was coming back from New York yesterday on the train and reading it, and other people were asking, oh, I haven't seen that yet, I want to get it. But I've been reading it, and I don't like to do events with authors where I haven't actually read the book, because I don't like to tell other people to buy it. This is really good.
Thank you.
It's really good. No, seriously.
And here's the other thing. There's no pictures in that.
There are no pictures. There's no pictures.
So when you get somebody to like a book without pictures.
And I told Brian as we were coming up here that 2 of the people I want to give this to are my 2 oldest nephews, because I think they're actually going to love it. And I see a young man here on the front row who will probably love it. So we want to give you all the chance to ask questions of Brian. We have microphones, so I'll just ask you if you raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone down to you to make sure that it's up top. We'll start on the front, and then we'll come back to the back.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mark Lerner. Talk to me a little about Jefferson. He's been portrayed in the Adams series and also now on Broadway as a very weak individual. Yeah. Is that how you saw him in your book?
No. I mean, he's a complex guy. But for me to comment on Jefferson is like me telling Michael Jordan how to play basketball. Oh, does he have a few weaknesses in his game? Yeah. You don't want to hear it from me. I mean, what this guy did in his lifetime, I don't think we're ever going to see it again if your name's not Benjamin Franklin. So do I judge him on his personal life? Does he have some issues? Absolutely. Should he have gotten a militia together to fight against the British? Probably. All right. Did he do some things politically to keep himself above board? You know, to keep himself relevant? Absolutely. But he's such an extraordinary American. He's such a deep thinker. He was so curious. He was somebody that brought so much. And one of the great things I had about this book is going to Monticello. And when you go there and you realize you're just scratching the surface of what he achieved in his life, I'm not going to judge him. I'm just glad he's on our team. I mean, I wrote one term that he was called the pacifist president. He was the unlikely guy to stand up to the Barbary Pirates, who were brutal and ruthless, because he didn't. A lot of Madison, for example, in Lynn Cheney's book, she said that she concluded that maybe Madison saw the grief that Jefferson took for not getting a militia together and fight for the British when he was asked to stand up and fight against the British. And he was fearing that he'd be viewed that way if he ran from the fight as the British were burning down Washington. So you knew it was in the forefront of the news. I laugh at people that want to judge Thomas Jefferson. He's not perfect, but I've yet to meet the perfect person. He had a big upside, and he made some big mistakes. But man, are we lucky to have had him on our team. And the other thing is, I understand that play, which it's about time we've had a rap musical about our founding fathers, way overdue. I, of course, wrote the score, but they beat me to the punch. I hear he gets pounded in that. I hear he looks terrible in that. And that bothers me. Just like I know people who saw the JFK movie say, wait a second, there's a lot of cool kids, there's a whole generation of people that grew up and think that all these conspiracy things actually happen like they were fact. So I am not going to judge him. I'm not going to say he's perfect. Everything's out there. I mean, I met a guy on my crew who says that he is related to Thomas Jefferson because he has a Hemmings in his background. That's his last name. Okay. He's black. And I guess we found out a few years ago that was true. Listen, whatever happened, happened. I just think it's our responsibility to learn about him, not judge him. And thank goodness we had this collection of extraordinary people in their 30s and 40s that were looking to stand up and form this country.
Thank you for your talk today. It was really good.
Thank you.
Can you talk to us about Stephen Decatur? There seems to be a Decatur in every state, and why he's so famous.
And a Decatur house, right?
Decatur house
a Decatur
here,
house in Decatur, Georgia. And the way I understand it is there was a real belief that he was going to be president. I mean, that's how heroic he was. So Stephen Decatur really fought, if you think of the Barbary Wars and the War of 1812, where the winds just kept coming, many of which came on the USS Constitution. And this fearlessness was, his fearlessness was legendary. And I'll give you the story, and I have the picture in this book. You wouldn't know that, Genevieve. Of a painting. And what happened is they go on a mission, and this is how extraordinary he was. Stephen Decatur is leaving everyone on a mission. If you want to talk about leadership, and they're sitting around talking like a bunch of guys who just had a successful mission, and it turns out his brother James is not coming back. Like, what is it? James has been wounded, maybe mortally. Because you're kidding me. And it was one of these pirate ships that they boarded, and they ran into a Malamute with a sword, and he mortally wounded him. So James is fighting for his life. Stephen looks at him and says, let's revenge this. That night, he gets a small group together, and they board the ship and try to find the mammoth guy that almost killed his brother James. And they find him, and Decatur's in a heap of trouble. And they're going at each other, hand-to-hand combat with knives and swords. And just as the Malamute is about to come down with a sword, and you see this painting today, this guy, Thomas Frazier, jumps in front of the sword and takes the blow. That doesn't kill him, but would have killed him. Why? Because they could. He goes, they can live. He goes, my unit can live without me, but it can't live without Decatur. Can you imagine have this type of leadership, being looked up to the degree in which he was, where you throw yourself, whether it's in front of a bullet or in front of a knife or in front of a sword? I can't imagine that type of inspiration, but he showed it. Everyone around him was pretty much in awe of him. And like you guys know, everyone in this room knows probably who he is. I didn't know much about him. I know he was in some children's books that I was in. I kind of thought he was fictional until you read everything he did.
Thank you for your contribution to learning American history, especially that early part of American history. 2 parts. First of all, what did you think that the French and the English were all about? Because it was during the Napoleonic Wars, and I know they were distracted about that. The other is, what were your thoughts about Hamilton during the preceding time and then during this?
Well, I mean, there was a constant rivalry between the two. One, I was heartened Because to see this bloodbath, verbal bloodbath that ended up sometimes being actual blood, to see these guys lock horns the way they did over politics and beliefs of big government and small government made me say, wow, we're not destroying the country and having these battles. You know, we're not doing something that Americans never did. I love the fact that the intensity was so strong, sometimes it ended up in a duel. And I'm not sure, you know, who was right. Hamilton fought by Washington, so he was a war hero. And then everything that he tried to do, Jefferson tried to undo, and vice versa. So I'll give you all that. What I also found staggering to find out is that, you know, you are for big government, small government. For the most of all, they were Americans. And then after you were done, you were done. You didn't hate to the point where you wanted to destroy the country, except for Aaron Burr, who has a clash with William Eaton, who says, hey, William, I know you feel like you were dissed by Thomas Jefferson. You want to overthrow the government? And Eaton goes, no. Not only that, I'm telling on you. So he tells on him, and he ends up in a long war trial. But, I mean, it was pretty serious stuff back then. So your other question was?
About the French and the British during the Napoleonic War.
This is what I would say about that. I knew, you know, just as a sports person, if you get upset in the finals, like the Mets beat the Orioles, I think secretly the Orioles wanted to play the Mets again in 1970 because you want to get that guy back. I find out that almost every one of our founding fathers knew that the British were coming back for a rematch. It was just a matter of when. Our goal was to keep that rematch far enough away. We're out of war debt. We kept the Indian, Native American population under control, solidified the country, and maybe had a standing Navy and Army to fight them off. So the quasi-war was a war against the French that we fought against. We fought under John Adams. And then you had the British who were fighting the French. The scariest day, I understand, for Madison was when he found out the British and French made peace, because that meant the British were coming after us, and he was 100% right. So the way they looked at it, I think they looked at us as a threat. Because what was America? A representative government. Really? We don't have that in Britain. We didn't have that in France. What was America? We rotated our leaders through elections. Really? We don't really have elections, and we don't kind of rotate our leadership. We do this thing called die in office or dying in office or being killed in office. That was their philosophy. So if America worked, they were threatened. The people were curious, but they were threatened. So I don't believe they were ever on our side. And it took us fighting the British straight up after a series of losses and Washington burning, and if it wasn't for miraculous weather activity, all of Washington would have burned. We would have lost almost all of our founding documents. I believe that they were very vested in us failing. That's how I feel.
I'm from Kansas City. I appreciate your reference to the Royals.
I don't appreciate my own reference to the
Royals.
Yeah.
That's tough.
It was a slip of the tongue. I'm editing that out too.
The score stands for itself.
Yeah.
My question really is somewhat of a personal question. What was your inspiration? Did you have a teacher somewhere that inspired you to really get interested in history, or what was it that inspired you at some point?
I'm from Massapequa High School. The people that gave you Jerry Seinfeld, all the Baldwins, sorry about Alec, Joey Buttafuoco, I can't apologize enough, Brian Setzer, pretty good, Brian Setzer Orchestra, and remember the Stray Cats. So I just had these great teachers. I had these incredible teachers who told stories. And I still remember how I remember World War I, thinking to myself, World War I, World War II, it's going to be on the test. And all of a sudden, my teacher, his name was Mr. Nobile, said, okay, I need you guys on this side and you guys on this side. Break this in half. Everyone grab some papers out of your hand. All right? Separate the desks into rows. I need you to climb up and down those desks. And when you get to hit each other, I want you to hit as many people with as many papers as you can. I'm thinking, this is the craziest guy. At that time, teachers were allowed to drink in school. And what he was teaching us is trench warfare, World War I. Because that's what you had to do. You went into a trench, and you had to have the courage to get out of that trench and run, knowing you're going to be gunned down, and try to get into their trench. And I remember that we had all these symbols and all these times. He also would make us say the presidents every single day. He'd sit there and point his pointer and see how far we got. And as soon as you got all the presidents down, you got 100 average into your grade. So little things like that. It was 8th grade. So all I wanted was the 100. I didn't necessarily want to be an American historian. But when I left that, I couldn't wait for the next chapter. I'm like, wow, we're done with the revolution. I can't wait for the Civil War. I can't wait for this. So I got lucky. I don't know if you guys are lucky, but to me, that if you can, I know there's a brain that has the math, and I know there's a brain that has the creativity, and I know, well, I'm creative, I'm not good at math. I am not good at math and science, but even if you're good at math and science, do you like stories? And then do you have pride in this country? If you don't, you aren't paying attention to the stories, because nobody has the stories that we have. And when you were born in America, it was taught to me early, but all I had to do was show me the stories for me to conclude it. You hit lotto. I'd rather be poor in America, than rich somewhere else, because we want the opportunity to be successful. We don't want it handed to us. We don't want to inherit it. We want to have the opportunity to be successful. And I'll bring up Donald Trump. He was rich, and he became a billionaire. That's the hunger you need. Yeah, he took risks. I don't know why he doesn't bring that up more. Hey, listen, I'm a millionaire. I don't have to work the rest of the day of my life. I got a brother and a sister that took it easy. For me, it wasn't enough. I want to dominate. I want to be bigger. I want to be better. I want to be more important. I think ambition is great, and I think the opportunity to fuel that fire is great. And that's really what I got from my social studies teachers.
In doing your research, did you uncover, how blessed we are and how the hand of the Lord played a big part, or the part in bringing together such a wonderful group of original founding fathers?
It's unbelievable. I can't even put it into words. I mean, that's why when people say, and I've heard this over and over again. In fact, I was talking to Larry Sabato on the radio yesterday, or was it Thursday? And he says, I know that bringing up Jefferson today is controversial. I go, really? It's controversial? And then he proceeded to talk about Jefferson and his greatness. So I think it's incredibly misplaced to say, well, such and such was doing this during his time, so therefore they're not great today. Alexander Hamilton, excuse me, you can't have, I'm trying to think of, who is you have Jefferson, who had slaves. You had Washington, who had slaves. And slavery is an abhorrent thing. We can't imagine it. Absolutely. I can't imagine black and white water fountains in the 60s. I'm not going to say everyone who was living or in their teens, in their 60s, or their 50s is a horrible person. To me, it's unthinkable to think that blacks would have to go to the back of the bus. How could that be possibly tolerable? But I'm also going to say, I'm in 2015. I sit here at 50 years old. 51, stop pressing me. 51 years old, I am not going to put myself back in the 60s and 50s. I know we go through an evolutionary process, and we're always trying to get better. So to me, there's two things. For that storm to come ripping through Washington and forcing the British out because our army wouldn't, before they would burn Washington to the ground, was unbelievable. When I was researching George Washington's Secret Six, and I found out that we were within a whisker of having our army wiped out, and we're backed up in Brooklyn Heights, and we have nowhere to go. So Washington had to do something against all his instincts. He had to retreat. So he waited for night to fall. He called on the merchant ships and whatever naval vessels we had to get our army out. Well, the problem was it was too windy. So it's too windy, we can't go until 11 o'clock at night. So with the fall of darkness, we start getting our army out. Well, the sun's coming up and half our army's still there. If the British see that we're leaving, they're going to go wipe us out. Well, out of nowhere, you find out from looking at Benjamin Talmadge's 76 page, and he was just another hero I'd love for you to look up, biography, who was by Washington's side during the entire war, that a fog rolled in so thick you could not see 4 feet in front of your face. So he's saying this, writing it in 1830, living it in 1778, and you can't see in front of your face 4 feet. That gave a virtual darkness, allowing the rest of our military to leave, allowing us to get into Manhattan and ultimately get out to fight another day. We would never have to be stupid enough to stand up face-to-face with the British again. We'd do a guerrilla warfare, we'd come from the outside, and we'd wear them out. If it wasn't for that fog, where did that fog come from? No one could still figure it out. And if you think that's one of those myth things, well, pick up a book from a guy that was written back then who told us that, who didn't have any agenda except for his kids urging him to put it down in paper, Dad, because no one's ever going to believe it. So we see it over and over again. It doesn't make any sense, but I think if we keep telling the story, you'll realize when people say we're an exceptional nation, and then some other people say, well, every nation thinks they're acceptable, we'll be able to go, excuse me, I don't think so. I have a little problem. I know I'm biased because I'm an American, but I also know we are the human all-star team that have a chance to live elsewhere and choose to live here, that have people knocking on the door and debating on different ways to get in, not to get out. No one's lacing a raft together tonight to try to get to Cuba. Yes. By the way, great shirt. Thank you. Cassius Clay. Yeah, absolutely.
I love your passion for history, the American history.
Thank you.
So I have to, and I haven't read this yet, and I can't wait to read this.
Okay.
And I know it's just fresh out. What's on the horizon? What are you working on next?
I would probably work on apologizing to my wife for being away for 5 straight weekends. I don't know. I have a few ideas afterwards. I want to see how this goes. And my thing is, too, is I'm lucky enough to be on Fox. And if I write a great book, the most important thing is authors are listening right now, or maybe in the audience, is to get it out there and give them exposure. If it's not a good book and you don't like it, it's okay. I would just like you to know about it. But I am at this other thing is I don't like selling. I like talking about it. I don't want to say, buy the book. You got to go buy the book. And when I'm on Fox, I do want to say I'm going to be in McLean on Saturday, and I want to say I'm in Fredericksburg on Sunday, and I want to say I'm going to be at the Nixon Library, to then Santa Barbara, to the Reagan Ranch, and I want people to go. But not if you don't want to. So I don't want to sell. So my whole thing is, when I'm on Fox, it can't be about Brian Kilmeade. It's got to be about the channel and the show. So if I feel as though I am going over that line, I will not do my next project. So I want to see how it goes. Hopefully I do it in a way that is acceptable to everybody and everyone's pumped up about it at Fox, because we are telling a great American story. And in case you know it or not, don't know it or not, Fox is the most patriotic company in the world. The only thing people say, oh, you're left, you're right. No. We're pro-American. That's who we are. We understand what I just said earlier, that we hit lotto. So my next project, I will say this, not far off from this one in timeline. Right. Well, when I read Bill O'Reilly's youth version, I get stuck on words. So that gets... Right. Listen, I thought about that too, and the publisher doesn't seem to think that since this isn't written for the Harvard professor to be impressed, this is written for the everyday American to be impressed. They didn't think it would be economically feasible. I don't know much about publishing to go do it. But, you know, if I was 6'7" with a deep voice and huge ratings and with my own show, you know, he probably walks into his publisher and goes, I have an idea. I'm doing a youth version. Who's with me? Get in line. So I have a little bit different of a deal. But I do say this. I give all credit to Bill O'Reilly, because I thought Brian's going to go to work and do news and sports, and then go home, and when I have freedom, I'm going to read history when I have an opportunity. I never thought the two would meet. But until Bill O'Reilly started doing Killing Lincoln, Killing Kennedy, who else did he kill? Kill Jesus, Killing Patton, Reagan, killed Reagan. That's right. If we have to run everything he's accomplished, we'll never get out of here. But until I saw the mix and the way he's able to talk, and the way I saw everyday Americans being lit up and excited about stuff that we thought everyone knew about Lincoln, about the chase, and about the murder, and how many other people were shot the night he was hit at Ford Theater and all that. Until I saw that, it gave me an opening. The other thing I saw was Glenn Beck on our channel would open up his show and show in black and white the Depression. And with stills, we talk about the Civil War and how far we've come. And I thought to myself, man, this is death for television. We're a news show. And the ratings boomed, and he has such passion for it. So in the back of my mind, I thought, you know, wow, there might be a market for this, and I don't have to necessarily do something different. I thought that the news people might have a sense of perspective if they took in these historical stories. So that's my long answer to a short question. I don't really think that, I think you can get this in 7th and 8th grade. I don't think you'll have a problem with it. And if worse comes to worse, you could read it with me. And I could help you with any words. And you have the book on tape, too.
We'll take one more question right here.
I want to thank you very much. I'm a retired colonel in the Air Force, and I want to tell you that bringing American history like this to light, especially with the things going on in the world today, is extraordinary. And I think you're a great patriot, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. That's it. Thank you very much for coming. I'll sign all your books if you want and can personalize it. I could do it actually right here. It would probably be better if you guys want to get in the line and do it.